Joining me is Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. He testified in a Senate hearing this week that every infrastructure decision is already inevitably a climate decision as well. Mr. Secretary, very nice to see you. Thank you for being here. This is a bold goal. The president is announcing he wants to reduce greenhouse emissions by 50% by 2030 based on 2005 numbers. So 50% in 9 years. The EPA tells us we were at 12% 2 years ago. So to get to that huge number, what do you think the hardest sacrifice is that Americans will have to make?
Well, it's going to take a national effort, but this is not a matter of something that can be done just by asking individual Americans to make individual choices. This is a matter of policy. I'll give you an example. Electric vehicles. Now, it doesn't feel like a sacrifice if you've been behind the wheel of one of these things. They're remarkable vehicles that perform well. But we've got a lot of work to do as a country to make sure that they're affordable, to make sure we have enough charging stations around the country, to make sure that the electric vehicles of tomorrow are made in America on American soil by American workers, preferably American union workers. That's not just going to happen on its own. And frankly, that's not going to happen without policy choices. So whether we're talking about things like that, whether we're talking about making sure that there are other low carbon or zero emission options to get around with trains and transit, zero emission buses, or whether we look outside of the transportation sector to the other things that need to be done, like retrofitting buildings. This is a huge lift. It is a major national project, but the United States is up to the task, and it's great to see the United States leading again, convening the nations of the world to discuss this as the president's doing today.
I do wonder, though, what you think the biggest, hardest change that people will have to make. And I know it's not just individuals, but it's a society. But to get to that number the president is talking about, and again, just to stress, it's a huge jump from where we are. 2019, we were at 12% drop in emissions from 2005. He's suggesting 50% in 9 years. It's going to cost us something. We're going to have to give up something. And I'm just wondering what you think will be the most difficult thing for us to do.
Well, we have to make the investments. But again, I think this is being characterized as if it's about our personal habits. I mean, certainly we ought to be paying attention to our personal carbon footprints, but this is a lot bigger than this. I mean, it's not in the context of your daily routine that you're going to modernize the U.S. energy grid. But it is the case that we have to make that choice as a country, and we have to make those policies that are going to make it possible. And critically, we've got to lead the world in doing this. The United States is a big emitter, but we represent about 15% of world emissions. That's why it was so disastrous when the last administration basically left the U.S. seat at the table empty. And that's why it's so important today that we are convening virtually, but still convening in the U.S., a summit of leaders around the world who don't agree on much, but who recognize just how important this is.
So Bill Weir, who's our chief climate correspondent, my guru on these things, pointed out that China in 2030 will peak in 2030 in terms of its greenhouse emissions. So President Biden wants us to be down 50% by 2030. China won't be down at all by then. So how do you sell that to the American people?
Well, look, it's natural for America to be leading the way. That's what Americans are used to be doing. The posture we're used to having, and then challenging the other countries of the world to catch up. We're looking for other countries to make big commitments as well, but we can't do that with a straight face if America isn't leading the way, if we're not walking the talk. That's what this big, bold, but achievable commitment from the president today is going to help us do. Resume that position of U.S. leadership, and then challenge the other nations of the world to be part of the solution as well.
So, Mr. Secretary, you're one of the administration officials running point on the infrastructure bill, the American Jobs Plan. Republicans in the Senate, we understand, are going to come up and present a $600 billion proposal. From what you know of it, is this a good place to start to working with them?
Well, I want to see more of the details. I've been on the phone with Republicans and Democrats in both houses just about every day, talking about the key areas where we have to work, the red lines, where the negotiations might fall. I guess the question I would put to those putting together this proposal or any proposal is, if this is a once-in-a-lifetime chance to make a transformational investment in U.S. infrastructure, one that will be remembered by our grandchildren the way we remember the interstate system or the transcontinental railroad, is this up to that task? And we'll just have to wait and see the details on whether this can meet the moment.
What's your willingness to do this in parts rather than a big whole? Because, look, if they have $600 billion worth of things that you like, one could look at it and say, hey, why don't you pass that and then work on the other stuff separately?
Well, we believe these things belong together, and that's not just because of an understanding of infrastructure that we think is getting broader for the American people, that things like fiber optic cable are as important as highway connections these days. But also, I would point out that the American people believe in this plan, both in its pieces and taken together. That being said, legislation is complicated. Lots of different ways can emerge in terms of the vehicles to get it done. The most important thing is we have to get this done, and the American people are demanding it.
I'm going to need, this is a complicated question, but I only have 30 seconds for an answer, Mr. Secretary. Usage tax. In other words, taxing people for as much as they use resources like electric cars. You could tax the mileage that they drive on roads. Is this something the administration would consider?
You know, the problem with that is that the president is absolutely committed to a promise that he made on the campaign trail, which is that taxes will not go up in a plan from this administration on anybody making less than $400,000 a year. And by the way, the plan we've put forward is fully paid for, but the way we do it is by adjusting corporate tax rates that we know need to be adjusted because a lot of corporations aren't paying their fair share. Now, there are a lot of different ways to do this that keep the president's promise. We have an open mind, but that is a very important line for this White House.
Mr. Secretary Pete Buttigieg, we appreciate you coming on New Day. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
And be sure to watch a special